Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Tuesday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our healthcare workplaces can fix our world, we got a real treat for you today. We got the one and only Leslie Boles, and we are running through the Hotline Investigation Benchmark Report for the healthcare industry. Ethico is the only company in our industry that has a big enough concentration in healthcare. We're purpose-built for healthcare. We have enough of a data set in order to get some statistically significant results for healthcare organizations. So if you're looking to benchmark your program, if you're looking to learn how to improve this all important, ever important intake channel, this is the place to be. As we get started here, drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat, connect with one other compliance professional today. You got to take advantage of this network that we're building, that we're all a part of, because like I always say, you get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. So stop reinventing the wheel, connect with somebody, and I guarantee whatever you're struggling with today, there's somebody in the chat on this show right now that has figured out what you are dealing with. Also, drop in the chat where you're coming from, and also drop in your favorite treat from the weekend. If I look a little puffy today, good eye. I gained a couple LBs over the weekend, but I feel like I've earned those. Check out this book that we're giving away today, Higher Ground, from our good friend Allison Taylor. This is going to be from the best tips and the best questions in the chat. We're going to give away 5 of these. And if you're not feeding your mind all the time, you need to start doing that. If you're here for credits for SHRM, CCB, or HRCI, we got you covered. If you've not downloaded the benchmark report yourself, this is a great time to do it. Start taking some notes on it. Send it around to your team, because this thing is full, chock full of tips and techniques. And like I always say, you'll hear this multiple times today, but the best benchmark for your program is your program. But it's always helpful to see what else is out there and what the next goal you should be shooting for to improve these KPIs on your path of continuous improvement. So go ahead and download that. And if you have not checked us out if you've not checked out Policy Plus yet, I'm telling you, you're missing the party. We have a brand new AI backbone platform for policy management that helps you draft policies faster, really cut down on that time from drafting to publishing, gives you much better visibility into that whole, process of the reviews and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, after the fact, we have AI quizzes for the policy, so you can actually prove comprehension that's much stronger than something that is just a mere attestation. So if you'd like to check that out, check out this quick video, and then we'll dive in here.
Your policy program has a lot of moving parts. Ethico keeps them all in view. Every approval, every attestation, every deadline in one dashboard. Start a new policy, and before you type a word, Ethico checks whether it already exists. Build it your way. Upload, write, link, or choose from a template library. Define your properties or let AI autofill to save you time. It reads your document and suggests the metadata for you. One click to save, straight to your policy library, a single source of truth for all your internal documents. Find anything instantly, even if a keyword is buried deep inside a document. Keep it organized with custom categories and nested folders. Filter by anything, owner, department, status, and more. Ready for review? Send it. Reviewers are notified immediately. Configure your review process, set deadlines, and ensure nothing falls through the cracks. Every audit trail, version history, and acknowledgement report is ready for you to export the moment you need it. One platform for every policy, every approval, every attestation. Ethico. Love your work.
Love it. I love that voice. People are going nuts for this thing. I love it. If you want to check out Policy Plus, please hit us up, and we'd be happy to show you what else is out there. If you're going to be in the DC area in a couple of weeks, June 4th through 5th, you should swing by the Opal Group's Compliance in the Age of AI conference. I'll be speaking. And because we love you so much, we got a Ethico 50 for a 50% off admission. So you don't have to sneak into the conference. All right, let's get one massive emoji explosion for the one and only Leslie Boles. She runs Revu Healthcare and also Nixari Solutions. We asked some of you who we should have back for the healthcare benchmark report, and the resounding answer was the one and only Leslie Boles. Leslie, welcome back. How's it going?
Good, good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
You look great in this. I love that look. It's kind of, it's very cool. Very cool. All right. So we're going to dive into the benchmark report right now. Keep your questions coming in the chat. We will try to get to those. We have a ton of stuff to cover, as you can imagine. Leslie is going to be here for color commentary, and she's going to be our kind of gal on the street, so to speak. She's worked across hundreds and hundreds of organizations, building dozens of programs, and she has a lot of great tactical, practical advice on how you can improve this function, this major pillar of your program. Our job in ethics and compliance is to crowdsource risk intelligence. We have to crowdsource these data points from these points of risk throughout the organization. And a channel that is extremely valuable is this hotline channel. And then the ensuing investigations do a lot to, live up to the standards that we set, the claims that we make to the stakeholders in our organization about the extent to which their voice matters. So there's a lot of great data in this benchmark report, if I do say so myself, and we're going to run through the executive summary right now to kind of dive in, okay? So the case closure time, this is like the granddaddy metric that a lot of folks use to kind of quantify the velocity of their investigations, all else equal. That was down to 23 days, which is about half of what the industry average is. Okay, and so the real win here is not about speed. It's about your ability to absorb complex cases and have a strong, anti-fragile, dynamic investigation process that can handle these various different things and get the right reports to the right people so that those cases can be closed quickly. Like we always say, we say this all the time, we want to close cases as fast as possible, but no faster. This is not about cutting corners. This year, and you'll see this across all business sizes in the healthcare space, Hotline dropped from the primary channel, or from the majority of reports. Historically, over 50% have always come through the hotline, and this year, for the first time, it dropped slightly below 50%. So is this part of a new trend where hotline is going to go away? I personally don't think so. I think for certain things, people are going to want to talk to a human being. But this just underscores the importance that every single channel that feeds into our internal investigations need to be, we need to remove as much friction as possible from all these channels. There's tons of risk intelligence. There's orders of magnitude more risk intelligence in your organization than you're likely getting. So anytime you get a fish on the hook, you want to reel that in, okay? What we've seen is that there's an increase in case complexity as well. So we're shifting toward a larger proportion of our cases are tied to these more complex issues, more legal consequence, things like that, privacy, regulatory, conflicts of interest. And so we don't think that that's cause for alarm. I think that this is an indication that our channels are working and we're getting more needles in the haystacks, which again, we can't do our job without putting our eyes on the biggest risks in the organization. And the more acute the risk, the bigger the impact that our efforts end up having on the enterprise value and the de-risking of the organization. And then finally, you all know this, you guys live this every single day, but the healthcare workforce does not live at a screen like they do in some other industries. And so for frontline employees, for traveling staff, for contract providers, they need to have channels that are available for them that make it easy for them to report points of risk intelligence in real time. The fall off rate for someone reporting something later, 2 hours later on their way home from work, whatever, is extremely low. So we need to remove all of that, all those points of friction from our channels and make it easy for people to have ways to report at their fingertips. Leslie, before we dive into case closure time, I know you spent some time looking at the report, and you have a very strong view of this sort of pillar of every compliance program. What were some of your biggest takeaways, or what would you add to that executive summary before we dive in?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would add, when you look at this isn't just a scorecard. I would look at this as a map, right? So the landscape of healthcare compliance risk, it's genuinely shifting. And so programs really look at these signals correctly and look at the data correctly so that they'll be positioned to lead. And this is what I'm excited about when I read this report is how can we turn these numbers into actionable items that actually improve our program? That way you're not playing catch up when regulators show up or when you have to report some of these key items out. So don't look at it as just a scorecard, look at it as a roadmap and apply it to your own landscape, and it'll help you just be great in the end.
Yeah, I love that advice. If something doesn't get measured, it doesn't get managed. And if it doesn't get managed, it doesn't get done. If we are an important business function inside of our organizations, we need to be in this continuous improvement mode. And part of being in continuous improvement mode is setting our sights on things that we want to improve. And so to your point, Leslie, if we can use this benchmark report as a roadmap to allow us to start to set goals on improving some of these KPIs, we can usually find some really strong things to change that end up being big unlocks for the impact that we're trying to drive forward. So let's dive into case closure time. So as I mentioned in the executive summary, case closure time ticked up 2 days, but still at about 50% of the broad industry, that kind of status quo average. If you see orange bars throughout this is tied to the NavX benchmark report. NavX has about 70+% market share across all industries. So again, there are some nuance, within the healthcare space. But again, we want to give you all the information available so you can see kind of where you might reside on these, against these various benchmarks, okay? So 23 days is the average case closure time. But again, keep in mind that that's just an average. The broad industry, we had some debate a couple of months ago about where this number came from. This is just kind of a broad heuristic, but you should be shooting to close your cases on average. Again, this is an average. There's a wide distribution, but on average at about 30 days or less. There, of course, are always going to be cases that are aged past, that can't be closed in 30 days because maybe it's a complex investigation or whatever. And we'll see some correlations between case closure time and case age a little bit later in this presentation. But if we double click on that average and we kind of bucketize this, you can see what's trended over time across these various different buckets. So what you can see is about 78 or about 77%, pretty flat from last year. 77% of healthcare organizations were closing their cases in that 0 to 30 day bucket, which is great. And you can see that there has been some slight shifts in that 31 to 60 days. So that ticked up about 1%. And that was pulled from that 91 plus days buckets, which was down to 4%. Again, you can see how those compare to the broad sort of status quo comparison, where on that 90-day bucket, it's upwards of 15 or something like that percent. I don't have my glasses or contacts today. But when you think about kind of bucketizing, Leslie, when you think about bucketizing or kind of doing like an aging report like this for an individual program, what kind of things should be kept in mind as folks sort of start to analyze their data, and what areas can they typically find to kind of get some, again, I'm always trying to what is the 80-20 rule? Where can I focus a little bit of effort to get that broader unlock through that lens? What would you tell people about, these kind of aging buckets in the context of their own program?
Yeah. So one of the things that I will say is don't chase the number, chase the quality, right? So I think a case that was closed in 10 days with incomplete findings is definitely more dangerous than one that is closed in 30 days with documentation that can hold up to regulatory scrutiny. So to your point about the complexity of the cases increasing, it's not program deterioration, right? If you have more complexity, it just means that they require more thorough investigation. It may reframe the individuals that you have in order to clear that case closure, and then also being able to report that out, right, at your executive compliance committee meetings to say we're taking a more collaborative approach because now we need to maybe include someone from legal or maybe from the clinical team or the medical staff office or however your organization is structured. And so looking at that will just help you to understand that speed without rigor creates a different kind of liability. And so this report is really great in assessing that, right, when it comes to those cases that are aging versus the ones that you're clearing out very, very quickly. Where is the line, so to speak, when it comes to it?
Human beings are wired for logic. And I think it's important as we go through this to think about your numbers or think about these benchmark numbers in kind of two sides of your brain, so to speak. On the one side, we want to look at all these numbers from a sort of, let's call it a selfish perspective. Validating whether our efforts are moving the things that we expect to move, right? I want to improve I'm going to use a workflow automation function in my case management system to help cut down on my case closure time. Let's say that, for example. Well, I want to validate, is that actually working? And is my hypothesis employing this new function leading to lower case closure time? Is that hypothesis being validated by the numbers? So there's sort of this selfish internal kind of temperature check that you should be taking with your numbers. But then there's also kind of this other side of the brain or this other kind of perspective that you need to be thinking about. How can I leverage my data to paint the right picture for leadership? Many times ethics and compliance as the second line function that is maybe more difficult to kind of show our impact with than something like sales or something like that. we need to get sometimes a little bit more creative to paint the right picture. And your case management system has a ton of data points that you can cut against each other to find correlations, to find things that are moving that help validate the efforts that you're taking. Okay, so if you hired somebody new to your team and the hypothesis, to the CFO, for example, was that, well, if I hired this person to the team, we're going to be able to, close these more important cases, a lot faster. We need to dig that data out of your case management system to make sure that you're presenting the right information. I think many times we get kind of blinded by the numbers, and we say, well, the number is the number. And I don't really think that necessarily is the case. There are these sort of two games that we have to play. We, of course, want to always improve our program. We need to validate that those efforts are turning into actual improvements. But we also need to make sure that we're managing the perception of our program outside at the leadership level, let's say, where they often don't understand the nuance and all the difficulties that come along with managing a compliance program in the healthcare space. So when somebody misses a target, these are a couple of things to think about. And of course, Leslie, jump in anytime. But if somebody misses a target window, is there a documented reason? Kind of to, this is kind of an allusion to a point that you just made before there, Leslie. Why are we missing our targets? Is it because somebody was out? Is it because a new person on the team doesn't understand the importance of it? Is it because we're not reviewing things fast enough? Or is it because there's some kind of a documented complexity in the case that maybe is causing us to deviate from the average or from the KPI or from the sort of goal that we have writ large? Is this pointing to a repeating pattern, please?
No, I was just going to add to, and I've seen it's sort of a program culture issue. Oftentimes this task will sort of be delegated to someone who's newer in compliance, and they're looking for sort of this documented process that they should follow. And oftentimes, and it's something to reevaluate in your own program, right? Who am I delegating this task to? What is their perspective of the task that I'm delegating? And are they following sort of the guidance that I've provided, or are they being innovative and thinking outside the box? And what I've seen oftentimes is lots of times that score is reflective of that person's interpretation or understanding of how they should carry out that task. So that's something else to think about. We always talk about culture from the standpoint of the folks who are we're looking to enforce compliance with. We never talk about culture within the actual compliance department itself. And so that's a really important aspect to look at when we're thinking about some of these things, because it really has an impact for sure.
Yeah, that's a huge point. I'm so glad that you brought that up. That sort of local culture can do a lot, or it can do a little in terms of helping us achieve those goals. And the more we can help kind of those new folks, paint by numbers, so to speak, as they sort of build up their own capabilities, the better, right? That kind of leads to this next bullet, like, can a well-configured platform handle a larger portion of your caseload? If you have new people on your team, I mean, a couple of things that have come out in our case management system over the last year are templated investigations, which can be applied to different categories. So if you, as the leader, the compliance leader who has a vision for how these things should be handled due to your years of experience, but you have newer folks on the team, applying those kinds of templates, kind of to Leslie's point, can really help those people get up to speed and start to kind of absorb or adopt your pattern recognition. Separately, or in addition, there's also a function for approval workflows. So if you're outsourcing, so to speak, to more junior people, some investigations, and there are certain ones that meet certain criteria that you want to put your eyes on, well, you can automate that process. So that ensures that those cases are closed as fast as possible, but you're not closing stuff that has a low, that doesn't, you're not closing investigations or cases that don't meet your sort of quality standard, okay? So you have to take advantage of the tools that you have. If you're an Ethico, client, and I talked about some things just now that you don't feel like you're utilizing, you should reach out to your client success manager, and we'll make sure that the platform is dialed in for you. But whether you have Ethico, you have somebody else, or you have, kind of a DIY type of a solution, going back and looking at that process and how the human beings, to Leslie's point, the human beings within your department are interacting with that technology can usually uncover some opportunities for improvement. So, this kind of leads to, where are some places for us to look to improve our case closure time? And Leslie, I know you have some things to kind of add to this, but I think auditing your intake quality is a big one. What we found is that spending, twice as long on, at least for the hotline side, we take intake calls for our clients. We spend on average about twice as long with those callers than the industry average. And that allows us to usually get a lot better information that allows that investigator to hit the ground running. What we tell people is that if somebody was coming into your office, you're never racing them out of your office, right? Unless, very rarely are you trying to keep it to 6 minutes or something like that. You're trying to get as much information as possible. So you have all these channels throughout your organization. You have an outsourced hotline. You have people that might, compliance folks on your team that might field reports as somebody walks into the office. You have this whole other pool of middle managers out there. Are you equipping them, and do you have ample quality control across those different channels so that when an investigator gets something, it's more than just kind of a flashing light in their inbox. It's something that they can hit the ground running with. Also, the second thing is to kind of start mapping your handoff points. So sometimes you are overseeing an investigation operation that's extremely decentralized, where maybe there's people at different hospitals who are doing those actual investigations. Have you mapped those handoff points, and do you have expectations for follow-up or for case closure or for escalation across categories or across these kinds of different locations? And then finally, I would say to review your case closure time weekly. Case closure time is sometimes an early indicator as for something that's systemically happening. And depending on how big your organization is, you might want to double click on that number and see if there's deviations from your average or from your standard across different business units or across different regions. What would you add for case closure time tips there, Leslie?
Yeah, and I would just also add too, I'm big on culture, right? Because I've actually worked in these settings, and I know how sometimes the culture can impact numbers. And maybe looking at across when you're trending the numbers for case closure time, also look at the type of problems, right? Who are you reluctant to have these conversations with? Are they about your top performing physicians at your organization? Are they about maybe a newer a person on the executive team that you're reluctant to have these conversations with about, and trending what those numbers are supportive of? For instance, if they're sort of easier and you deal with HR all the time, it's easier to have those conversations with them. No problem. Case closure, done. But someone on the executive team or your physician leadership team, there's sort of a lag. You need to address that, right? That's a culture issue. And so looking at it just a little bit, this is where I like to get warm and fuzzy, just a little bit more, and really looking at your rationale or reasoning for it and being honest about it will really help you to understand those metrics a lot more.
I love what you said there. Sometimes this stuff that you're talking about, kind of to your point, is, viewed as like this warm and fuzzy thing, but really it's like, I don't know, it feels like everything is an extension of this warm and fuzzy thing. How do we actually interact with each other? What's the true kind of degree of accountability in practice beyond the sort of word on the wall or the principle that might be in our value statement, kind of to your point, Leslie. And I think it's critical to remember, look, I'm going to wax poetic here perhaps, or at least inspirational. You're climbing a mountain. Okay. And like the mountain is steep the whole way up. So you've probably come a really long way from where you were 2 or 3 years ago. That's phenomenal. You need to pause for a second and look back on how far you've come. But the fact that you're going to continually find things to improve or areas that might need some tweaking or some additional attention, that's not an indication that like you're not doing your job right. That's an indication that the mountain you're climbing is steep the whole way up. And this is an infinite mountain, by the way. So our job is to just keep climbing and keep finding ways to improve. So look at your intake channels, try to find some of those bottlenecks, kind of to Leslie's point. Where are some of these handoffs falling flat continually? Where are there opportunities for coaching, whether it's within your team or cross-departmental, depending on where those vectors of intersection are or interaction are, with your program? And you can usually, again, find a bottleneck in your process that if you apply a little bit of, grease to that piece, so to speak, you can really usually increase a ton of velocity. But again, we have to sometimes carve out time to zoom out and reconsider where we're at and see kind of more of that bird's eye view of our entire operation to find those things that are really going to move the needle and to improve. So I love this breaking down the numbers. If you haven't checked out the benchmark report, there are a ton of these sections throughout the entire report where we take a particular metric, kind of this headline metric, and we double click on it and compare it across some other different things here. So what you can see here is we're looking at hospitals, clinics, health systems, things like that. And we're looking at our case closure time, comparing anonymous, versus identified by these different, industry groups. Okay. And so what you can see is that on the bottom, health, finance, the case closure time on those anonymous are the lowest among the whole group. What you'll of course see is that if you look down those columns and you compare across any of these rows, these identified reports always are closing significantly faster, usually a week, up to kind of 2 business weeks on that top for hospitals, almost a week and a half or so faster when they're identified. So all else equal, we of course, anybody who's done an investigation will tell you, we of course, all else equal would prefer an identified reporter versus an anonymous reporter. What we found on the hotline intake channel is that about 50% of the people, when they're able to have a full kind of 15-minute conversation, up to about 50% of the people that start out anonymous end up becoming identified by the end of that call, which again helps with follow-up. Sometimes there's some additional details, of course, that an investigator might need. It always helps to have a larger pool of anonymous people. Or a larger pool of identified people, of course. We're going to be talking a little bit later about some techniques on how you can, across your channels, right? Let's say you have 3 main channels: in office, hotline, web form. Put an asterisk by in office to include those middle managers. There's usually some things you can do to help get people more comfortable being identified. All human beings have this sort of self-preservation thing, not to jump ahead too much, but we're all wired for self-preservation. People are concerned first and foremost with making sure that there's food on the table for their family and that they have a roof over their head. And to the extent that they believe that there's a risk to that by becoming identified, they're going to opt, usually to be anonymous. So there's usually some things we can do to kind of grease the skids, as they say, and get more of those identified people and get them more comfortable with the reporting process and the protections that you've put in place. I've never talked to a compliance person that doesn't want to kind of root these things out and is not a high trust person that wants to leave the world better. And so we have to do some influence to really influence those stakeholders to know that they truly have a safe space in the ethics and compliance team that has a loyalty, not just to the organization, but really to this broader concept of integrity that they can sort of, come under the warm wings of. Okay, let's talk about breaking down the numbers on case closure time across intake method. So what we see a pretty big discrepancy here between in-person, which is at 26 days, and web form, which is at 27 days. Those are kind of even, over a week faster on the hotline side. So is that a function of better information coming out of the hotline? Is that a function of more complex issues going in office? You're going to have to look at some trending within your own organization to kind of be sure. But again, we're just kind of looking at all these numbers from a continuous improvement lens on where can we find some hotspots that we might be able to bring, some better sandpaper to kind of sand those things down so that we can A, get more risk intelligence, and B, process that at a much faster rate. If you look at the reporter types, you can see some interesting trends here as well. So employees have about a 27-day on average, and then you see customers and related parties and vendor contractors, these sort of people outside of the organization, they're about 2 weeks faster. So again, this is a helpful way to cut your data. So you're not just looking at a single number, what is my average case closure time, but you're understanding that there's some dimensionality to that number, and there's probably some different stories that those data can tell you. The last one I want to look at, and feel free to jump in on this one, Leslie, if you think there's anything interesting here, but this looks at case closure time across those 4 buckets, 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, and beyond 90 days across org size. And something that really jumped out to me here is this bottom right end of the corner, or bottom right end of the chart. So 0.7% of the over 50,000 employee organizations, these really large mega enterprises, they have an extremely low proportion of their cases that are falling in this over 90 bucket. If you look more at the middle, you see some kind of leveling out of somewhere around 6 or 7% kind of on average. But again, look at this aging within your organization. Even better if you can check it over time. What were we doing before COVID? What have we been doing the last couple of years? And how have I seen these buckets, the size of these buckets change over time? Anything jump out to you with this case closure time?
And I was also going to say, so to your point about pre-COVID, post-COVID, one of the other things you may want to look at is how often are we in office, right? To point. Even not only to address the in-person, but also to conduct the investigation. I do know just being, never having the luxury prior to when working the hospital setting of working remotely, we seem to get a lot more done when it came to the investigative aspect of it Monday through Friday, because you're on site, you're there. And so you want to look at how that changed, right? If you now allow employees within your department to work from home, how does that impact these numbers or this response time or the aging for the closure time as well? And then if you've moved, I've seen some organizations, they have this hybrid approach. They only require maybe the compliance officer to be on site once a month. Well, how does that impact? Or how does that impact your directors or your manager levels? So a lot of people are not also evaluating that aspect as well too. So that can also be a contributing factor.
And look, if you're not like a data junkie and you don't feel like building the reports inside of your case management system, there's a lot of flexible reporting in ours, but we're seeing a lot of people just take their full case list and bring it into Claude or bring it into ChatGPT and ask some of these kinds of questions. Like, you probably have some questions in your mind that you're like, man, if I was just better at Excel, I could get it. You, of course, can build those reports in our system, but you can also download the entire thing over the last 2 years, your entire case list over the last 2 years, and ask some of those data points. You, of course, want to check against hallucinations. But to Leslie's point, our visibility into the relationships within our data has never been easier. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can see so much more now. A lot of those barriers, think back 8 or 10 years ago where the reporting wasn't where it needed to be. In order to get that, you need a freaking data scientist. A lot of us have a data scientist subscription, so to speak, with some of our AI. And these are all things that we should be using to, again, make sure that we're making better bets with our time. Very few of us have all the budget we need, have all the headcount we need, right? And very few of us are not busy, right? Like, the work is going to fill the available time. Everybody that I talk to, they got a ton of projects and a ton of ideas and a ton of things that keep popping up that maybe they didn't plan for. So again, our entire job is really not just building a to-do list for our program. It's really about making the best bets with our time on the things that are going to move the needle the most. So it's easier than ever to do that, is the big point. Okay. I love talking about issue anonymity because this is kind of one of those touchy-feely things, or those fuzzy, whatever you call them, things. But this is something that is a massive indicator of your broad corporate trust. And there's usually significant improvements that you can make on a micro and a macro basis across your enterprise. So let's zoom out and let's look at a high level on what's going on with issue anonymity. So in the healthcare space, we have seen pretty flat issue anonymity over the last several years. It's kind of been bouncing around 73%, or I'm sorry, identified rate. Identified obviously is the inverse of issue anonymity. So we've seen issue anonymity kind of bounce around, 25, 29, kind of a little bit under 30%, and around 72, 73% identified across healthcare. You can see how that compares to the industry average. And in healthcare, it's usually, the identified rate is usually a little bit higher than the broader economy. And I think there's some big opportunities for us in healthcare to always connect, if we're talking about culture, and culture is merely the sum total of behaviors within the organization. And to the extent we want to manage culture, we need to sort of point to some ideal, some values and some behaviors that are beyond what our sort of natural proclivity is as human beings. That's usually significantly easier, at least conceptually, it's significantly easier in healthcare than it is in, I don't know, a manufacturer of, lighting components, right? Like, yes, we all love light, of course, but that's not about saving lives. There's not this sort of higher purpose that exists in the healthcare space. And so the more we can do to kind of fly in the slipstream of these higher principles that many of us in healthcare selected ourselves into because of those higher principles, the more we can kind of connect to those things, it can do a lot to pave the way for the type of protection and the heart that we have in the ethics and compliance department to get people more comfortable participating in the risk management apparatus that is the compliance function. What would you add to, like, how do we get issue anonymity? How do we drive that anonymous rate down from a tactical perspective with the broader workforce?
Yeah, so I like talking about this one too, because this is one of my faves. It's addressing the culture, not the channel. Anytime you have anonymous reporting that spikes like that, it isn't a failure. It's actually a signal, right? There's a gap between the anonymous rate and maybe, for instance, like in the healthcare finance division, or even just between a nurse and a doctor. That shows you there's a gap between that individual and your top performance, and it's actually showing how much risk intelligence you're not capturing. You work the same way. Your central business office or your CBO or your patient accounts office, if you have all of this anonymous reporting and it's about the leaders of the organization, there's a culture issue that you need to address. And so oftentimes we mistake, I've seen some organizations say, oh, we received this many anonymous reports, this is a good thing. And it is, but it also is a chance for you to look at culture, either within that department or within that sector or within that service line. And we forget to do that sometimes when we're thinking about anonymous reporting. One of the other things I will say, and I say this to many organizations, if you have anonymous reporting all throughout, right? And then all of a sudden in your exit interviews, when we should be asking all of these questions, right, about risk as a person is leaving out the door, and everyone's identifying themselves and they don't want to report it anonymously, you have a bigger issue there, right? That says a lot about your culture. And we often forget to compare those two benchmarks. What happens at exit interview when a person's like, forget this place, I don't care anymore, I have no problem identifying who I am, and they just let it all out, versus your anonymous reporting rates that you're getting, when a person is employed and not walking out the door. Another really important part that I've seen that people just don't do really well is talking about retaliation policies, right? And what your anonymous protections look like for employees, and proactively communicating about what happens to report after submission can really also help as well. And it's one of those sensitive areas that we don't necessarily look into. We have a very reactive approach to in compliance. And that's, some of it can be cultural, some of it can just be we're busy. But this is a really, really important aspect to look at when we're thinking about anonymous reporting rates. There's so much more to dive into. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so many, to your point, there's so many, this metric is across all of your reports. And so there's so many different ways that you can sort of peel the onion, or there's so many different ways you can look at this prism, this data cube that is your case management and your investigation, information. You can really look at that across a number of different ways to find indications of things one way or another. Again, if we're making better bets with our time, that a prerequisite of that is us forming hypotheses on what should move or what should be happening within our program. Let's look at issue anonymity across these channels. I always love this one. So what this is showing, kind of in purple, is stuff submitted online. Green is in office or in person, and blue is hotline. And what you can look at is on the left side, we have our identified, and on the right side, we have our anonymous. So the big takeaway here is that in general, again, an identified report usually closes materially faster than an anonymous report. You can see on the hotline, there's a 6-day difference. You can see there's a 7 workday difference submitted in office. And then you can see there's only a 1-day difference on the online channel. And so what this tells me is that there's likely, and again, I would want to validate this if my data said the same thing, there is likely an information issue on the online forms. So this would indicate to me at a broad level that there are a lot of folks using online forms that have not taken a look at those in a while and have not tried to optimize that channel with branching logic, with better messaging to make sure that the proportion of anonymous reports through that channel are lower, right? A little campaign that helps answer some people's questions, whether it's an FAQ on your ethics portal or some communication that goes out, anticipating what some of those biggest concerns are that lead somebody into an anonymous report versus an identified report, can do a lot to open that up. And then again, if you can reconsider how that form looks, and if it's asking the questions that are most necessary for that downstream investigator to hit the ground running with that data, you can start to enjoy or synthesize, so to speak, that gap that should exist across all channels. All else equal, like I always say, all else equal, an identified report, I would always expect that to close faster than an anonymous report. So when I see this at a macro level, this is an indication of some opportunities for improvement there. And then you can see kind of across different categories how this anonymous rate changes. And I think this is not really that surprising. It's kind of what you would expect. So we see kind of a 50% on the bottom left here. And then, for some of these less sort of acute type of things, whether it's privacy and things like that, on the top right, people are not really that concerned about their welfare, so to speak, for privacy type issues, where it's something that is maybe closer to fraud or something that has like a higher kind of risk acuity. We tend to see a relatively higher correlation with anonymous rates. So again, that's just one extra cut that you can make with your data to see if that trend exists within your organization. So a couple of things to think about with issue anonymity, in addition to what Leslie just mentioned. Remember that book that Amy Edmonds wrote, The Fearless Organization, which was built on this study that was done where we saw the best healthcare organizations were the ones where the nurses in the operating room were willing to question the God. Okay, I'm just kidding. The surgeons. Okay, so ones where they had a flatter organization and better sort of culture in that operating room, they always had significantly better healthcare outcomes than those that kind of fell victim to that caste system that can sometimes exist within this sort of hierarchical thing that can exist within healthcare. So remember that retaliation exists across all industries. It can exist even more in a high hierarchy type of a organization or an industry such as healthcare. So we need to have an eye for that kind of stuff, and we need to be forming hypotheses that we can hopefully nullify through some scientific testing, so to speak, to validate whether or not retaliation is an issue within our organization. There's a lot of risk in that hierarchical thinking. That's why we want a flat organization where every voice matters, where everyone's eyes are on the risks that could be compromising those better, ideal healthcare outcomes for our patients. Reporter awareness. Yeah, please.
I was just going to add one other thing that this data will help you also identify are the generational. Great point. The generational challenges that are happening when it comes to communication, because let's face it, it's happening not just in healthcare, but all across in every industry. There is this transition that's happening, and it's a lot of tension. And so in healthcare specifically, we have a lot of very seasoned individuals who have been there for a long time, and it does create this hierarchy where people are very afraid to challenge it in any way, shape, or form, especially when you're talking about the newer generations coming in. So looking at it from that standpoint is very important too, across every sector, from nursing to physician to, finance to whatever. That's also a really important aspect to evaluate it. Again, I like to talk about these things because oftentimes in compliance, we love these data and these numbers and it's all great, but we never really address the true problems. And so looking at it from that aspect is also a very, very important thing to do.
Whose job is it to have a view of what Leslie is talking about? Like perhaps it's leadership's job, but I would argue that it's our job more than anyone else's. We're this circulatory system of the organization. We have intersections, with all of these different departments, and we should be the experts of human behavior within our organization. That means we should understand how human beings are wired, and we should have an eye for, or an ear for, so to speak, the different generational mores that exist across these strata within our organization. If we can have an eye for that and we can help equip nurses, whoever, on the front lines for these challenges that are inevitably going to come. Like, listen, if you're a millennial, you remember what it was like when you were first stepping into the organization and there were all these baby boomers and all these Gen Xers who had a certain view of us. We need to kind of break that pattern, kind of to Leslie's point, and make sure that we're getting the best out of the Gen Z that's coming up behind us. And that's true across all layers. So we have a different level of pattern recognition, and we have a different lens that we look at risk or we look for risk through, that we need to apply to this ever important generational shift. That can be a whole conversation, Leslie. That's a really great point to bring up, because all those points of friction between these generations lead to chasms of interaction and chasms of collaboration. And so we need to be able to fill those things in and make sure that we're giving people a voice and we're helping our organization see around the curve to get the best out of all those eyes and ears that exist within our organization that are hopefully participating in this risk management, experiment, so to speak, that is the compliance department. Okay. So 72% of healthcare reporters identified themselves in 2025. The status quo comparison is about 55%. Again, we want that as high as possible, but no higher, right? We want to try to max that out. So we need to be able to get into the mind, bring that beginner's eye, get into the mind of those stakeholders who we want to speak up about things, and try to guess what are the things that are preventing them from speaking up in an identified way, giving them an overview of the reporting process, letting them know what they can expect, letting them understand the guardrails and the protections that you've put in place, and continually saying those over and over throughout the year can do a lot to make a meaningful change in this identified rate, which, to Leslie's point, is broadly this barometer for corporate trust. And also, one more thing on anonymous rate, healthcare has, relative to some other industries, and you've maybe experienced this, particularly since COVID, the turnover rate in healthcare is a little bit higher than other industries. So you may be in an organization that's a really high trust organization. Well, if you have even a 20% turnover, that means 1 in 5 people in your organization are new over the last 12 months. If your organization is better than average, right? Let's say it's warmer than average. It's a pot of soup that's warmer than average. If there are people coming from average organizations, all of that is bringing the temperature down. So you need to put disproportional effort, depending on your turnover rate, at least some kind of consistent effort and perhaps disproportionate effort to make sure that people understand what they can come to expect in your organization and what ideals actually drive the behavior, unless you're fine with that soup getting turning into a gazpacho. Okay, nobody likes gazpacho. Well, no, we do. We're getting into the gazpacho season. Okay, let's talk about reporting channel use per 100 employees. So we saw really high rates during COVID and the year after, right, 20 and 21, and those have leveled off at about almost 4 reports per 100, and that's compared to about 1.7 at the status quo. So again, I want you to look back at where were you at before COVID? What did it look like in 2019 and 2018 if you have those data available? And then see, we've kind of normalized, right? Like everyone was talking about the new normal at, remember, the end of 21, and it's like, doesn't feel normal yet. Now we're kind of in the new normal. So look back over the last couple of years. Look back at maybe where you were kind of pre-COVID before this, this big disruption happened, to get a sense of what does good look like in your organization. And regardless of where you're at on there, I also want you to take a step back, and I'm not trying to, lose the room here, but there's probably 10 times more points of risk intelligence. There's probably 10 times more reports that exist in your organization. It's probably higher, but let's just say as a starting point, if the average is 4, maybe you're at 4 reports per 100. Think about, there's probably 40 reports per 100 in your organization. What are some things you can do to kind of open those floodgates? Again, we want our technology dialed in. We want to be able to do more with less, all those kinds of things. We want to leverage technology to close our cases as fast as possible, no faster, all those kinds of things. But just keep in mind that there is a risk that you're viewing your world through a pinhole, right? We're just looking at the world through this tiny pinhole because we're only seeing a slight sliver of the true risk intelligence that exists within the organization. Our real game is to get more of those needles, or more haystacks in, so that we can find those real needles to get more statistically significant indicators on where our efforts should be placed, okay? You can see that this reporting channel use is broken down across these 3 channels. We have web form at the top in purple, which is expanding, continues to expand. We've seen a decent expansion on the in-office or the in-person. Again, middle managers are often included, depending on how your setup is. Middle managers are often included here. We could do a whole nother session, and we've done multiples in the past, on this, really fertile ground that is the middle managers, when we can bring them into our compliance apparatus and help them be those sort of compliance champions throughout the organization. We can usually get some earlier indicators than sometimes the lagging indicators that end up coming through our case management system. And then finally, you can see that about I think it's 1.8 of the total reports per 100 are coming through the hotline. So again, cutting all of your reports across these channels can usually give you some indicators on where you should look for points of improvement. When you think about these different channels, Leslie, I think you said something in the pre-show about this, but how do you think about those channels, and where would you, maybe this is a cut that somebody hasn't done before, really looking, maybe they're just looking at that high level, how many reports am I getting per 100? What advice would you give them in looking at these sort of different composite channels that lead to that broader headline number?
Yeah, so some of the things that you can do is looking at, to your point about middle managers, seeing if they're not trained and equipped as intake channels, you're leaving so much risk intelligence on the table, right? Even having specialized, targeted education for them on what that means to them, because more than especially in healthcare, clinical staff are 6 to 8 times more likely to report it with a trusted manager than pick up a hotline call. And so making sure you have that as an intake channel is it's not a problem to solve. It's actually a sort of strategy to build on. And then I cannot stress enough, in healthcare, think about all of those really unique areas that does not come to mind for all of us that work during the day, our nighttime employees, our traveling nurses, our per diem contractors, if they don't know how to report a concern on day one, that's a gap with real exposure. And so oftentimes we, as humans, we think about the environment in which we work in, and we forget about all of the other aspects of healthcare that works 24/7. So that's a really important aspect to think. I know when I was working in hospital, that's one of the things we were very intentional about. And I use the word intentional because it's something we had to think outside the box for as far as the way we thought. We need to capture our nighttime employees. We need to capture our per diem contractors, our locum tenens, because everybody has them in healthcare, especially in the provider setting. So it's really something to think about too as well.
And, you know, that's such great advice. And like, I just want to keep saying this to everybody. This advice, though, is kind of hard to take sometimes in, you know, a healthcare compliance context, because there's like so much stuff flying around. Like there's so much stuff. You're just kind of like trying to bail water out of the ship. Like it's hard to kind of step back and just kind of chew on your pencil and sort of sit under a tree and contemplate. But if you can take a little bit of time to do that, even if it's just a day, even if it's just like one morning a month, to really reconsider and really kind of think outside the box, to Leslie's point, you're probably going to find some constituent groups within your organization that are maybe being a little underserved, or maybe with a little bit of effort, you can have a big impact on those nighttime employees or these remote employees or whatever. It's difficult to do, but it is important to do, because it ends up leading to some really interesting results. I'm saying bringing that sort of beginner's eyes to your program. If you've been in your role for a couple of years, think about, go through that thought exercise. I'm sorry to beat this dead horse, but I just think this is so important. If you were the first week in the program, what kind of things might you be seeing? And if you can sort of force yourself to do that thought experiment and bring those beginner's eyes to your program, you're probably going to find some opportunities, because you do actually have the benefit of that context, right? In the back of your mind as you're going through that process, you're probably going to find some areas for improvement that might take a little bit of effort to have a massive result. That's what this game is. You know, we're, you know, I liken compliance to poker so much. You win a poker tournament not by going all in on every single hand, but you're picking your spots and you're going all in on the hands that you know you can win, because you have a high likelihood of winning that hand in that round or whatever. We need to have that same mentality with the bets that we're making with our time on our compliance program, okay? So we want to treat every channel as a primary channel. The distribution, you know, this is not 1996 anymore, where everything is coming only through the hotline and there's just really one channel you got to get right. As these channel use is being diversified across these channels, we need to treat every channel as primary. To Leslie's point about middle managers, we need to make sure that those folks are equipped. If you Google Ethico Middle Manager Toolkit, you'll see a freaking awesome toolkit that has a bunch of resources that you can download. That's all for free, that you can repurpose, and it can help. You know, if you're like, man, I'd love to sort of, you know, activate these middle managers, but that's a whole project that's going to take me kind of 6 weeks to kind of map that stuff out. Download this thing and get started with something. It's, you know, you climb a mountain, you know, you eat an elephant by taking a bite at a time. You climb a mountain by doing one step at a time. You just have to sort of get started on that journey. And we try to create something there for you for free to get going on that thing. Simplify that intake experience. That gap, that minuscule gap, that non-existent gap between anonymous and identified case closure time on the web form. Remember that purple graph a couple slides back with all those boxes on it? There was a 25 for identified and a 26 for anonymous. That's a cause for concern. So that digital intake experience can probably be optimized. There's probably some information that you can enable reporters with, so that they can give you better information, so that you can widen that gap and, you know, bring those down across the board. But look at those intake channels by substantiation rate. Think about this as well. You know, I think we were talking about this, the quality of the depth and quality of information. How different is that across anonymous reports and identified reports? How do you think about that sort of that facet of this topic, Leslie?
Well, I think it's very important. Again, I'm always a mushy, feely type of girl. So I believe in evaluating culture. Like, for instance, teaching hospitals. I have actually seen with my own two eyes, teaching physicians tell medical students and interns, we create our own program here. Everything that they do with you in new hire orientation, that doesn't apply to you. And evaluating, that's a quality evaluation of how that particular sect or a subset or group reports up to compliance, whether it's by the hotline. It's already a barrier. And so evaluating those things are really important. And again, some of this, oftentimes I've heard compliance professionals say, well, that takes too much time. Well, it's necessary, right? Because it does become a factor. It does become a score that it impacts compliance at your organization. So looking at quality, not just of the input and the output of the report itself, but also the trends that you're associating with all of these scores are just as, I keep saying important because it's all important. It's very, very important.
But I mean, kind of to that point, we can't fall into the quantitative trap. This is the trap that I'm just looking at numbers and I'm just, it only exists, we're just naturalists, right? Unless I can touch and feel it, then it doesn't exist. We have to have that broader view and understand that there's this whole kind of qualitative piece, to your exact point, that is arguably more important than, the quantitative almost is a function of the qualitative in many respects. So we have to be able to have an eye for that stuff. If we're going to truly optimize something, it's not about just processing reports. Every single one of those reports is a human being that is participating voluntarily, by the way, in this risk management program that you have going. And so making sure that we're optimizing the quality of those interactions, the information that we're getting out of them, the experience that employee has, goes a long way to building a resilient, anti-fragile compliance program. Okay. Let's get into, let's go to substantiation. I really wanted to go through categories. There's so much to cover here, you guys. This could be a 4-hour webinar. And as great as Leslie is, I'm sure everybody has some stuff to do coming back from the weekend. Oh, finally got a rim shot. Hello. Okay. So issue categories, I think, is an extremely interesting one. There were some interesting trends. I want to jump to this because we've seen a significant shift in the category breakdown for ethics and compliance issues. The biggest category are code of conduct violations, which is great. Not that the violations are happening, but that is such a large proportion of those ethics and compliance type topics. So your categories, the big thing I want to talk about with categories is that your categories should be working for you. You don't want 10,000 categories because you can't get any trending data out of them. You also don't want one category, obviously, right? So have some sort of logical taxonomy, maybe for those primary categories with like another layer of those secondary categories that can give you better visibility into those hotspots. But again, if there's so many categories that you're only having 2 or 3 per thing, that's probably creating a lot of noise for you. The other thing I would say with respect to categories is make sure that you are maintaining that time series potential, that time series analysis potential across your categories. So let's say you go through a process beginning of this year and you say, I need to fix the taxonomy of my categories. I got too many categories, or I inherited a program from somebody that thought about this thing a lot differently. And you make those changes to your categories. Ideally, you want to push those changes back historically so that you can start to, you can get that time series benefit of that time series analysis as you see how trending changes over time. Otherwise, it's going to take you a couple of years or a couple of quarters at least to get enough data points for you to start to gain the benefit of that new taxonomy. How do you think about issue categories, and where are some of the pitfalls or some of the red flags that you've seen in programs that you've come in and consulted with, Leslie, on this kind of thing that you may have seen that I alluded to?
Yeah, so the one thing that I've seen is that the investigation infrastructure around the program was designed only for certain types. And that is something that a lot of us miss, because years ago, when we were talking about, the hotline, there was typically, HR conduct issues. And so we've built our investigative infrastructure around it. And I think what everyone has to realize now, especially when we're talking about integrating things like AI and all the rest, that our caseload has outgrown that design. So if you have a one size fits all for your investigation infrastructure for it, it's time to reevaluate that completely. I mean, I have also seen many organizations they don't even have a pathway for how do they identify these other categories. And so this mix of categories is actually a good thing, right? It actually means that people are aware, they're reporting, even if they're not reporting in the proper pathway, they know to do it. And so that's a good sign. And you should make sure that your pathways that lead out from those particular categories are substantial, right? To help you to be able to manage that investigative aspect of it.
Such a great point. We have to let those categories work for us. Those are handles that we can utilize, that we can leverage the technology to utilize, to your point. They are, to distribute, to triage faster, things like that. But it often gets kind of overlooked and everything just kind of gets dumped into a bucket. There's maybe somebody on your team that's a HIPAA expert. Well, any HIPAA case, you might want to go directly to that person instead of it just being this sort of grab bag. So have a little bit more intentionality. And again, your job, newsflash, your job is to bend the world to your will. Okay. That's what the job is. So let's not sit in the back seat or the passenger seat. We have to grab the steering wheel for our program and drive it to where we want it to go. All right. The last thing I want to talk about, I know we have a 1 minute here, but we may go 2 minutes long. I just want to talk about substantiation rate. I think substantiation rate is something that we often look to see the broad, again, we want to see velocity, great. But we also want to see kind of the quality. Are we able to substantiate these issues? If anybody's done investigations before, there's some portion of your reports that are unsubstantiatable. There's also, right, those are naturally, you're never going to be able to substantiate them. There's also another bucket in that distribution, or another sort of sliver of that distribution, that are things that maybe if they weren't anonymous, or maybe if you had better information, or maybe if they knew to give you the information you needed, whether it was another party or a witness, they could be substantiated, but you're not able to do it given this sort of fact pattern. And then you have this other bucket of substantiated issues. We, of course, know that the game is that sort of second bucket I talked about. That last bucket, those are just always going to exist. Our improvement is going to come from converting more of those things in the second bucket, those potentially substantiatable items that we're not able to substantiate. What we've seen for a trending perspective is almost 60% of cases on the Ethico side have been substantiated in the healthcare space, which is great. There's usually, just from my view, I see across all these industries, right? I see that typically there's usually a little bit of a higher substantiation rate. There's generally a higher level of conscientiousness. You're probably shocked by me saying that, but in the healthcare space than some other industries. But substantiation rate is a great metric for us to look at. You can look at over time, over sort of case aging, as you'd expect, this rate sort of comes down. Kind of 54% of cases are getting substantiated in that 30 to 90-day bucket, right? In those middle two buckets, we have a relatively lower substantiation rate because it's easier sometimes on triage to be like, okay, well, I can close this case because I just don't have the information. It's an anonymous report that's very sparse. Our substantiation rate is often lower in that first bucket. And then over time, again, the substantiation rate can drop. We can see a substantiation rate is always higher with vendors and contractors. I think that's primarily because of the profit motive involved there and the lack of fear of retribution that typically happens with vendor contractors that is more present on the employee side. You can see the employee side is 57%. Some people were surprised by this. We talked to a couple people had questions about the healthcare benchmark report, and they were surprised by this middle metric, that customers and related parties. Why is it so much lower? I think often it's because they don't have the context that there's a higher proportion of unsubstantiatable reports in that customer bucket. So I think the real battleground is on the employee side. To a point Leslie made a couple of minutes ago, making sure that they have the information that they help, remember that thing, help me help you. You have to help them help you. You have to make sure that they know the information that you need in order to substantiate those reports. Like sometimes it's hard to get traction on something that's not substantiated. And so giving them that reminder, either on your intake channel, as a piece of communication, as a pop-up on your ethics portal, whatever, giving them that information can help to not only reinforce the commitment you have to doing something, right? To really kind of prove to them, hey, I want to do something with the information you give me, but also can help them feel like their voice is being heard because they've increased the odds that you as an organization can take action for those things. The other thing about substantiation report is or substantiation rate, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, Leslie, as we wrap up. We've seen a trend of people leveraging, in addition to substantiation report, which is kind of this lagging indicator, looking more toward corrective actions or remediation plans, the proportion of cases that have a remediation plan attached to them as an indicator of investigative success beyond or in addition to substantiation rate. I think that's something that we have a lot more control over from a compliance perspective. When I look at substantiation rate, like I said, it's a very lagging indicator. It's a slow metric that is often 2 or 3 steps removed, something that we can't control because people have to be educated. They have to have trust. trust. They have to actually raise their hand. Like there's 4 or 5 things that have to kind of sort of happen in order to like really move that substantiation rate up in a meaningful way. And that usually takes some time and some concerted effort. The application of remediation plans or corrective action plans is something that you could start tomorrow. So how do you think about corrective action plans as like an indicator of investigative success in addition to or relative to substantiation rate?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. I have to be honest. What I think.
All right, we'll wrap up there. Just kidding.
I was not expecting to say it.
I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. No, I'd love to hear.
What I think is the biggest driver of substantiation outcomes should be the detail captured at first contact, right? I think more organizations should really invest in intake quality before investigation quality. I think having that investigation, those investigation metrics and that quality is important, but really what sort of detail are we getting at first point of contact? And if there's an issue there, that really trickles down into everything thereafter. And so it could impact investigation, and you could have a false positive as well, too, simply because you're trying to create these corrective action plans around information that was not captured well from the onset. So I have a different perspective on it, but
no,
yes,
that's a good perspective. No, it's actually a great perspective. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it from that side, but yeah, that's smart. Okay, checkmate. You checkmated me at the end there, Leslie. That's great. Just kidding. I'm totally kidding. All right, so we are a couple minutes over. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for the one and only Leslie Boles. You know, Leslie, I was so glad that you joined us on this because, like, literally, you know, they don't call you Leslie. Everything she touches turns to gold. Boles for nothing, okay? Because every single one of your little your tips, your pearls were phenomenal. And what I love about you is that it's not this sort of theoretical thing where it's just sort of academic. It really is kind of brought down to earth, and there's so much kind of actionable tips. So thank you so much. Love you. Love you as a guest, as always. I hope you guys found some value in this today. We've really only scratched the surface on the benchmark report. It's worth a download. It's worth checking out. I'm going to keep rambling until we hit 5,000 emojis. Never mind. We hit it. Amazing, amazing. But we're really only scratching the surface on it. It's worth downloading and kind of perusing through it, talking about it with your team. And again, you know, Leslie said something so important before. The benchmark report is a great tool to reinforce the culture within your team. There's probably some great ideas on your team, and having a 30-minute session, or you send it around to everybody and having a 30-minute session to say, hey guys, let's brainstorm on how we can improve our intake process, how we can improve this ever important channel of risk intelligence to help us do our jobs in a better way is a great thing for folks to rally around. And I guarantee you, you're going to get some great ideas from it. So definitely download the Healthcare Benchmark Report. Definitely follow the one and only Leslie Boles on LinkedIn, and definitely join us this Thursday for another amazing Ethicsverse. Love you all. See you Thursday.